everybody, it's Jill. I'm going to start talking, and I am here at my daughter's house, and I'm here with Sailor. You want to come sit with me? Come on. How's everybody tonight? You going to come sit with me? Come on. Sailor. Mm-mm. It's like last time. He was like, "You're talking. What are you talking about? Who are you talking to?" He's looking at me funny. How is everybody tonight? Welcome to Friday night. This is Stitch and Crime, and I'm covering the Piketon Massacre. Hello, Trucker Steve. Hello, Alicia B. Hello, Crafty Annie. Hello, Laura. Let's see. Who else is here? Kimberly was here earlier. I hope you feel better, Kimberly. I got to try not to put my finger in front of the camera. I am on my phone, so you guys are not going to get to see my hands. How do I sound? I got me a new little gadget here. Hey, Lorna. And I'm watching for the comments on the TV over here because it's easier to read. For some reason, they're not coming up on here. So I'm glad I did that. Sounds good. Good. I've got two new gadgets tonight. I've got one that you guys are sitting on, and then I've got this. So looks like my light's okay. Look at those new glasses. Don't they look great? I'm really big over here to my left. So what's everybody drinking tonight? I've been drinking coffee all day, and I've got black coffee now. What's everybody drinking? Put it in the chat, whatever you're drinking. It's really hot, so I gotta watch. Ready? Where'd y'all go? It's Friday night. We got to be goofy because this is some crazy stuff we're fixing to talk about. Water keeper with lemon, says Alicia B. Barbara Clark, hey, good to see you. Hey, there's Joan. Good to see you. Glad you're here. Mary Webb, plain old water. Diamond Girl's got her water. I've got water here too, but I don't know. I'm just really doing the coffee today. Maybe it's a quota, huh? Okay, so I hope that some of you were able to go over to the community tab and look at the chart that I put up for you, because I put up a chart showing the relationship between the two families. So the Wagners and the Rodens. Okay. So if you want to reference what happened, you can always go back at another time. Not right now, but go back at another time and look up that chart. The trial that I am watching right now is George Wagner the Fourth, and he is the first to go to trial. Now, there are 4 people who have been charged with these murders. 4 people of the Wagner family supposedly killed 8 people of the Roden family. Angela Wagner, the mother, George Billy Wagner, the father, George Wagner the fourth, the son, and Jake Wagner, the son. Those are the 4 that have been charged. Hello, Sandy. Welcome in. So, tonight I want to go over what has been said, and I think that it will give you a good place to understand more about what happened, and then we can start talking about the trial more as it goes forward because I have the opening statement. Now, you guys, I have like 10 pages. I don't know if we're going to get through the 10 pages or not. I don't know. We shall see. Hello, Kimberly. Hello, Nisi. We'll see. I am working on I brought two things with me to work on. And this is one of them. I've started putting the NYX color, and this is the seam double shawl in fingering weight being done in my yarn. You guys, I'm really close to being able to put that back to a place where you can buy it. I'm still working on it. And then I've also got my something in red mal with me. So that is what I'm working on. And I'm going to go ahead and start. I get Floozie all the time. I don't know why. Whenever somebody puts Floozie up there, I think I need one of those big sun hats on. That's just, if you picture a Flossie, it was one of them floppy hats. So, first of all, I want you to know what the defense started by saying about George. Okay? So, the first thing they say is that he denies knowing anything about the murders. He denies knowledge. He also can't help that he's a Wagner. He can't help it. He can't help it that, those people that have been charged with this, he can't help the family he was born into. He wants you guys to know, that's not his fault. Seriously, his lawyer said that. Yes. And we got to hear George's voice the other day in trial, and OMG. Yes, his voice is more feminine than anybody I know, than any man I know. Good grief, I'm telling you. So his lawyers want you to think of 5 things. First of all, Jake says George had nothing to do with it. That Jake says George had nothing to do with the planning of the murders. That George shot no one. That George didn't destroy anything. Think about that's number 1. Number 2, think about Angela, the mother, and Jake, his brother. Think about their credibility. That's 2. And 3, the enormous incentive given to Angela and Jake to tell their stories. So, yes. Now, Angela has already been to court. She pled guilty, and I have seen the list of charges that were brought by the grand jury. And all of the charges were the same for all 4 of these defendants. And they are co-defendants still. Even though George is on trial, and even though 2 of them have already pled, they're still co-defendants. Okay? And I'll explain that here shortly. So, hi, Sharon. Angela pled to, I believe they said the first 8 were the murder charges, and they took those out. And she pled to 9 through 22, with the exception of number 14. So if you look those up, and you can find it, that is what she's pled to. and they gave her 30 years, which at her age, she's in her 50, right around 50. She's going to be 80 before she ever gets out. So it's basically a life sentence. Maddie boy, good to see you. I'm so glad you're here. Whoop, whoop. Thanks for coming by. I appreciate it so much. Now, Jake has pled guilty to everything. He's pled guilty to everything. And he did that and said that he would, and Angela and he both have said that they would testify against the other two as part of their plea deal. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. If she lives that long it's the right, that's exactly right. So we'll get deeper into what all of that means, but just remember, Jake did this, told his story, pled guilty to all of this stuff, and he doesn't want, because in Ohio, it is a death penalty state. But with his testimony, they have agreed to take the death penalty specification off of all of them. However, they're still co-defendants, because if he does not testify, if he for some reason decides not to, or he doesn't live up to his end of the deal, then all bets are off and the death penalty goes back on. And that's the same for Angela. Okay? So just keep that in mind when we're talking about this stuff. So he's saying the enormous incentives that they were given, that's what he's talking about. Custody is not a motive. So he's saying that the argument about the custody of the child, Sophia, who was 2 years old at the time, that is not incentive. Okay. He has his opinion, right? He's the defending lawyer. Everyone had a motive to kill in this case except George. Because remember, you can't pick his family, right? So, according to what has been stated by the others, Angela thought that Sophia was being molested. Jake was jealous and abusive. Billy was involved in drugs, said Chris Sr. owed him money. Remember, George is not like the rest of his family. Also, on a side note, he says, and I'm like, I don't know that I would have said this, but he said, remember that George led them to the weapons. Oh, really? Okay, so it is very complex. So I'll do my best, y'all. All right. Before I tell you what the prosecutors say happened, according to Jake, evidently. How many of you have gone back and watched some of the, anything on this case? Please let me know in the chat if any of you have any more knowledge at all. Do you have any knowledge of this case other than what I have talked about? Correct, Alicia. Hi, Cheryl. Hi, Denny. Yep, doing good. Sandy was reading up some stuff on the internet. It has been wild. And today, a witness that was there today, and we may go over an hour today, just so y'all know. I hope you're okay. It's just Friday night, I'm This is the out of town session. I am here with Sailor, although he is not wanting to sit next to me for some reason, because I'm talking to that thing, I guess. Yes, Lorna. She says it's all about Angela getting control of her grandkids. Yep. That's what I'm hearing from everybody. Okay. Are you ready to hear what Jake says happened? Because a lot of what the prosecution is going to say here is according to the statement that Jake made when he pled guilty. Okay? So I'll try to keep an eye on the chat for anything important, but I may not see your comments while I read this. Here we go. So Jake has made a deal. He has told them what has happened, and they took the death penalty off. He has pled guilty and will receive 8 life without parole sentences consecutively. And on top of that, there are 78 firearms charges. 78. And I don't remember the exact number. There's like 114 different other charges. If he agrees to testify against his family, and they will remove the death penalty specification on their sentences as well. So Jake was upset that he and Hannah were no longer together. He wanted her back. He was jealous when he found out that she had someone else. He says that killing her was not his idea. But he did go willingly. His dad was the first to bring it up. Now, we of course thought the mom was, but, he says his dad was the first to bring up the idea that Hannah was dating people that were bad for Sophia, letting her be around bad people. They knew that Hannah had been sexually abused when she was younger by a family member, and she was still spending time with that person and taking Sophia with her. So Jake didn't want to kill her. However, even though nothing had happened to Sophia at the time of these murders, he decided that killing her was the best thing to do, and killing all of them. That was the best thing to do, just to make sure that nothing would happen to Sophia. Now, plan number one, when they all sat down as a family to discuss this with George there, plan number one was kill Hannah Mae and kill Corey Holdren, because he's a new boyfriend, and make it look like Corey killed her and then himself. But George, or Billy, he didn't think that would work. Plan number two, Angela suggested turning in Chris Sr.'s grow operation. Billy said no, he didn't want to turn on his friend. He'd kill him, but he didn't want to turn on him. Plan 3 was they decided to kill Hannah Mae, Big Chris, Frankie, and Little Chris. and the others were just there. They were just there. So obviously, anybody who was going to be there were going to die because that was the plan. And they knew ahead of time that there might be other people there. So everybody had to go. Everybody, no witnesses. No witnesses. So they started planning this in January of 2016. And this happened April 21st of 2016. They started planning it in January. And this started after they read a Facebook message between Hannah and someone else. And Hannah was quoted as saying that they'll have to kill me first because I'm not going to let them have her. Jake purchased silencer parts. They put they bought a truck. So it was like I think it was like a red Chevy, something like that. And they bought that specifically. George went and got the money, and they paid for the truck just for that night. They had heard one of their cousins, and his name is Silas Wagner. And Silas was selling a truck. They overheard him say that, and Billy said, well, we'll buy it. And a day or so later, Jake, George, and Angela came by with the money and gave the money to Silas for the truck. They built a false bed to go in the bottom of in the bed of the truck. They built a false bed, bunch of wood and all this stuff. And then they put a whole bunch of hay and stuff in there in the bed. And that's where Jake and George hid, and Billy drove the truck over to the murder scene. They wore ski masks and dark clothing. Billy made plans with Chris Sr. Now, Chris Sr., that's Chris Sr. Roden, okay? And Billy and him were supposedly best friends. And they made plans, and Billy wanted to said he was going to make an excuse about some sort of a drug deal. And that would get Chris Sr. to come to the door so that, they could kill him. And the plan was that George had the SKS, and he was supposed to, sniper style, he was supposed to kill Chris when he came to the door. That way, Billy didn't have to kill him. So this was around, they got there around 10:30 p.m. They watched, and this was something that has been talked about in the trial, they watched Boondock Saints, and the clip was played during testimony. But they watched that before they left. George and Jake did. They parked the truck behind their barn, okay? They put their clothes on there. They put all the gear on there. They didn't want to leave their shoe prints or anything anywhere else. So they did all of that behind the barn. When they got to Billy's, they waited in the back of the truck until Billy came out and when they got to Chris's, until Billy came out and lowered the gate. So, in other words, Billy had gone up to the house and he had talked to Chris Sr. and he came and he let the gate of the truck, the bed of the truck down so they could slide out of the truck. And George got under that truck and Jake got under Chris's truck. They were parked right next to Chris Sr.'s truck. And George had the SKS rifle. So they had silencers, and the silencers were recovered with other evidence inside of a well. And these silencers had failed. They instead put on the silencers that they had made from fuel filters that they had taped onto the guns. The SKS and the 1911 that George had. Now, you guys that know about guns, that will mean something to you. The Glock did not have a silencer. So, an SKS, a 1911, and a Glock. Those are the three that were used, and those were the guns that left evidence that they were able to find and match to these guns. So that's come out in trial. They had gotten all of their phones. They left all of their phones back at their house so that it would appear that they were at home when all of this happened. And Angela had instructions about what to do with the phones because supposedly Angela was back at the house with the kids. And Jake had gone and gotten Sophia the night before, conveniently. So supposedly that Angela was back at the house with all of them, babysit. She's babysitting. She couldn't have been there. So they had bought a phone jammer. Now, what this is something that when they turn it on, all of the phones that were there at that location would not be able to get calls or to call out. That way, those that were there would not be able to even call anybody. But it didn't work. Its battery didn't last very long and it failed. So the phone jammer didn't really work. No burner phones. So around 10:55, there was an outgoing call from Chris Sr. to Billy's phone because George had not, when Chris came to the door and George had not shot him like he had thought he would, Billy decided, well, I've got to get him to, to make up some sort of a something that would give us some time and not alert everybody in the house, yada yada. So he decided to ask Chris Sr., well, man, I lost my phone. I don't know where my phone is. Can you call my phone? So, yeah. So Chris Sr.'s time of death was shortly after he made that call. So they're pretty certain about at least about when it all started, when the killing started, because they feel like Chris Sr. was first. He had been shot at the door, and his arm was broken, and there were wood splinters from the bullets coming through the door frame and burying the wood splinters inside his arm because he had tried to protect himself. He was shot 9 times. And those shots came from both Jake and Billy. George and Jake had to calm Billy down afterwards because he came out screaming, "I just shot my best friend. I just shot my best friend." Now, Gary was the other person in the house. He was shot 3 times in the head by Billy. It knocked his glasses off and his hat off of his head. So they had gone back out to the car, back out to the truck. They had thought that they had decided they would take Chris's truck to the others because then they wouldn't alert somebody. They would see Chris's vehicle and they wouldn't alert them. So Jake went back in to get the keys, and when he went back in, he saw that George and Billy had dragged the bodies of Chris and Gary back to the bedrooms. So now, that was the first location, and there's 4 locations where there were people who were killed. 4 locations. That was the first location. 2 people at that location. They went to Frankie's, but the door was locked. Now, Chris Sr. lived in a trailer. He had bought a trailer for his wife. Frankie had a trailer. And the 4th location was a camper. Frankie had installed locks recently with a chain because his 3-year-old Brentley could open the door and he would wander out and go. They'd find him out in the yard and they'd be like, "What's he doing?" At middle of the night, he'd get up and go walking around. So he put a lock on the door. Now, if you remember, I told you guys all that these first 3 locations were on Union Hill Road. They were all on the same road, but it was a country road, rural area, and they weren't right on top of each other, but they were all on that same road. I want to stop and say thank you guys for being here. And for those of you who are watching, I cannot see how many of you are here, but I appreciate you guys who are lurking and watching too. Thank you so much. And for those who are watching the replay, I appreciate you guys as well. So, thank you. So instead, they decided to leave Frankie's, and that they would come back later. They took Chris Sr.'s truck and went by Dana's house. But they didn't stop there either because Dana's vehicle wasn't there. It wasn't there. So they decided, well, we'll come back. They could have gone in. They could have saved her. She wasn't there. But instead, they decided No, we'll just come back later when she's home, right? Hello, Tammy. Hello, Donna. Hello, Diana. Thank you. So then they drove down to Kenneth's house to see what was going on there. They didn't stop there either. They decided to go back to Chris Sr.'s, and then they walked over to Frankie's because these two were fairly close together. They weren't the same property, but they were fairly close together. Now, when the jury went on this, they actually took the jury on a ride of this, and there was media that went with them, and they were like, "Why? What is the purpose of going up here and then coming back here and then do?" Because that is the actual route. They took them on the actual route that they did. So, thought that was interesting too. They walked over to Frankie's, and Jake tried prying the back door open with a knife and broke off the tip of the knife. And so he climbed in an open window and then opened the back door for George and Billy. The 3-year-old Brentley was lying on the couch, and the TV was on. He was asleep, but the TV was on. Jake went to the back room where Frankie and Hannah Gilley were and shot both of them with the 1911, which is a .22 evidently. Again, he took their phones along with, he took Chris Sr. and Gary's phones. He took their phones. So this is why, and they destroyed all the phones, and this is why officials only had phone records to use. They didn't have the actual phones to find out what's going on the victim's side of things. They got back into Chris Sr.'s truck, and then they drove to Dana's. Now, Dana was Chris's wife, and she lived in her trailer, which Chris had bought for her. She was his ex-wife, but they were very close. They were actually closer apart than they were when they lived together. And he bought her a trailer so she could be close by, but it was down the road, okay? And it was Dana and his son Chris Jr., which they called Little Chris, and Hannah. Hannah is the one who had the child with Jake. And that child was 2 years old at the time, but she was not there. Who was there was Hannah's new baby that was 5 days old. So they drove back there thinking that Dana would not think anything because this would have been Chris's truck pulling up. They all went inside, according to Jake. Billy had the Glock, George had the SKS, and Jake had the 1911. Jake says he wore the 10.5 shoes and George wore the size 11 shoes. Now, that's typically not their sizes. Their mother bought these shoes. There's testimony from trial where she bought the shoes. She admits to buying the shoes so that they would have something different. They were going to try to pin it on whoever they could pin it on. This is not something that the boys typically wore. They usually wore boots. George took position outside of little Chris's room. So he's standing guard outside of little Chris's room, just in case. Shoe impressions in photo evidence matches the size 11 shoes having been in that spot. So Jake positioned himself in the hallway where he could see both Dana and Hannah. He could see into their rooms. Dana Dana's face was lit up by the light from her phone. And so he knew that she was awake. And she made a noise. And then Kylie, the new baby, started to cry. He took 2 quick steps in and he shot her. Then he rushed out and went into Hannah's room and shot Hannah. He turned Hannah. See, Hannah had been turned the other way. When she heard something, she obviously had turned towards him because her body was this way, and then it was pushed back, and there was some evidence that there was a line on the back here where she had been repositioned. And he says that he rearranged her body so that the baby could nurse. Then he went back to Dana's room and he shot her more times because she was making noises. When he came out of Hannah's room into the hallway, Billy was standing right there in a stance, guarding. George was still in his stance, guarding Chris's room. And Jake went over into Chris's room and killed him. They again took all of the phones. George drove the purchase truck. Billy drove Chris's truck. They went down to Kenneth's house, and this was at the turnoff. Okay, so there's a turnoff at the end. Kenneth is down at the other end, and there's a turnoff down there. And George positioned that the purchase truck there at the turnoff, and he sat there as a lookout or a getaway in case something went wrong. The electric sensor that Kenneth had up didn't work, so he did not get alerted. He was a heavy sleeper. He took blood pressure medicines and stuff. He was a heavy sleeper, so he didn't even hear anything. And this location was the one that had the camper. Now this was they say this was like 15 minutes from the other locations as the crow flies. Well, not really as the crow flies, but by route, it was about 15 minutes from it. So Kenneth didn't usually lock his door because his camper didn't lock from the inside, but he had a bolt on the outside. So when he left the camper, then he would bolt it, but when he was inside, it was not locked. Billy, according to Jake, Billy killed Kenneth. They removed the motion detector that was faulty, and they took the time to remove trail cams that were around because Kenneth had a small shed with a small amount of marijuana that he was growing, and he had trail cams to watch it. Jake and George dyed their hair that week. Jake wanted to look like Norman Reedus from The Walking Dead. Y'all know, listen, he's no Norman. Trust me on this. He thinks he is. He's not. I can see how he's trying to look like him. Got the straggly hair and, the badass look, whatever. But yeah. George helped modify the truck. George signed the custody document. Now, we haven't talked about the custody document yet, but yeah, dyed his hair. And they all got tattoos, by the way, afterwards. Now they drove back to Chris Sr.'s. They left Chris's truck in the driveway and drove the purchase truck back to their house and back behind the barn. So they just reversed the process of everything they had done. Drove back, took off all the gear, put other clothes back on. They took apart the false bed. They tried to take apart and destroy the guns. However, they found out that that was not as easy to do as they thought. I know, Lorna. I mean, you can see how he's trying to look like him, right? You can see it. So they put everything in a duffel bag and they buried it temporarily in the barn. And then they burned everything else, the clothes and everything else. They burned everything else. Billy took the purchase truck to his niece. Now, George told him, I don't think that's a good idea. He said, I didn't think it's a good idea to buy this from somebody that we knew. And I don't think it's a good idea to give it to somebody that we know. But nobody was listening to George because remember, he's really not like everybody else, right? So this was the next day. He takes that to her and he gives her, I got something for you. And he gives her this truck. It was titled in her name that day. Her name is Katie Wagner. So Billy has his brother Bobby bring him back. That was the daughter. Katie was Bobby's daughter. She would have been a cousin to George and Jake. So Billy had his brother Bobby bring him back. Bobby says George and Jake were outside when they got there, and they led him over to the new barn. They wanted to show him a pig. So not the barn that they had just, all this other stuff. But, the new barn. We're going to show you the new barn and a pig for some reason. And then they went in the house and talked for a while. Jake says they all began being careful about their phones and stuff because they were really quite sure as soon as they were done with all this, they were pretty sure that their conversations and things were being tapped. Now they were, but not yet. It's just starting to cool off a little bit. So Jake led them to the guns, he says. Jake says he led them to the guns. And they say that Jake led them to the guns. Now, I don't know where the whole thing about George led them to the guns was. I just know that that's something that that George's lawyer said in the beginning. So I don't know where that falls in there. Haven't found it yet. If anybody does, let me know. And let's clarify who led them to the guns. But Jake, they in the prosecutor's notes, she says that Jake led them to the guns. They put the guns, they took them apart and tried to destroy them. Then they put them in 4 5-gallon buckets that they filled with concrete. And they attached those to a goose box. Now, this goose box was like a box that had like geese inlaid on it, right? and they took it out to Flying W Ranch. The Flying W Ranch is where Frederica Wagner, the matriarch, that's her place. It's like 2,000 acres. There's their granddad who had passed away, who was sick or whatever. I don't know. They may have even put his ashes in there. I'm not really sure about this, but they took that box and they attached, and they had to put a bunch of stuff in that box, and they attached those buckets to it and floated it over there by the spot where the granddad liked to fish and stuff. And it eventually sank. And that's exactly where the law enforcement found it. They took it back to the lab. They broke apart the concrete, and they got all the parts, and they fired the parts. They were able to put it together enough to make an actual, put a firing pin to it and fire some bullets through it, and guess what? It matched. So Angela has come forward. She came forward 5 months after Jake. She says it was her idea, that she nagged Billy to do something about this whole situation. Okay. That they needed to fix this problem, that this was a real problem and they needed to fix it. And she nagged him and she nagged him and she nagged him, and he kept telling her, I have a plan. I have a plan. She admits that she bought the phone jammer, the shoes, the bug detector, that for now this isn't a bug zapper, y'all, a bug detector to know whether anybody was listening. She Googled and printed out the custody documents and forged Hannah's signature and her mother's signature. Now, her mother is Rita Newcomb. Rita Newcomb is a notary. Angela stole Rita's stamp. She forged everything and put the stamp on it. She admits that she manned the phones that night, says that the three of them left together and came back together with different shirts on. She said George removed the money from the safe to purchase the truck. And although he suggested buying it from a family member, not buying it from a family member, because he said that wasn't smart. It wasn't smart. There's a lot about this that wasn't smart. She told Billy that she had felt bad about involving Jake and George. That's what she felt bad about. She forged her mother's signature too. She stamped it, she forged Hannah's signature, and she forged her mother's signature. And George, Jake, and everybody signed the custody papers. They all signed it. She felt bad because she said George was having nightmares. And Billy said, I don't know why he would have nightmares. He didn't shoot nobody. Angela says she felt bad about not having a better story at the border for the shoes, because George told her not to worry. He had tried to wipe off the footprints at the scene. George had helped build the goose box. She admits to the hacking of Facebook. We haven't completely talked about that, but she admits to that. We haven't talked about the border yet. Angela says that everyone, including George, had agreed to do this to protect Sophia. They all agreed they had to protect Sophia no matter what. Angela admits that she threatened to get a gun when Tabitha was fleeing the residence. Now, Tabitha was George's wife, and she got out of there by the skin of her teeth. They even tried tracking her down. They called the police on her the night that she got away. She still got away. Angela also admits that they had family meetings to plan it all out. So, wow, I did get it all in that hour. That's what I've got so far as what happened. Now, more details are starting to come out in trial, okay? When the heat started to really, people around town were starting to ask questions and thought some people had kind of thrown it out there that possibly the Wagners had something to do with it, and there was a lot of speculation because of Chris's grow operation, and that Billy had connections to drugs, and there was all this stuff. Locals know local stuff. So the Wagners decided to leave and go to Alaska. So they told law enforcement, we're moving. And they decide, well, that was the right thing to do, to tell them, if you need us, if there's anything, we just really feel, we just really need to do this because we just feel like it's the best thing to do for the kids. Because by now, they had all of the kids with the exception of the baby. They did not have the 5-day-old baby because they had done paternity testing, but there was no conclusiveness to that because Jake thought that 5-day-old baby was his. So he had her do paternity test, but it hadn't really come back. So they didn't really know whether that baby was there. So they didn't take that baby, but they took all the other kids, and they moved to Alaska to the Kenai Peninsula. And I think it was called Wasal or Wasel. Something similar to that was the town where they moved to. But before they got over the border, the BCI, which is the Bureau of Criminal Investigations for Ohio, was able to get permission to bug their phones, to tap their phones. Because had they not done that, when they got over the border, they would have all gotten new phones and all of that would have been lost. So they were able to get that. So they had started tapping the phones. And then after they started hearing some things that that sounded suspicious to them, is when they decided to go to the Wagner's house that they had left. They had sold it. They sold that property. They packed all their crap up into some trailers, and they had stored some trailers off on a piece of property, and they took a whole tractor trailer worth of stuff with them and went to Alaska, all of them in one big Suburban. And they were in Alaska for quite a while. I want to say close to 2 years. Don't quote me on that, but they were there for a while. And then they decided to come back. Or it was like around 2 years of this time frame of stuff. So I've not got that time frame down just yet. Just being honest. Just telling you what I know, what I don't know. It's good to know what you don't know, right? Someone very smart told me that. And while they were in Alaska, Jake gets married again. You are not going to believe who he marries. He manages to get somehow to get a girl to marry him who was a former Amish Mennonite. She testified today. No kids. They had no kids. She testified today. Now, I'm going to tell you guys, there is a YouTube video out of her telling her story. I have bookmarked it, but it's on my phone here. I'll have my laptop. I can't share it with you guys. We might be able to do that at another time, but it's out there. And I don't know how I Googled that. I want to say I put in, her name is Elizabeth Beth. So she was Beth Wagner. And she's now Beth Armour. But I want to say that I Googled Jake's ex-wife speaks, something like that, and you will find it on YouTube. And it's like a 28-minute video, and I haven't finished watching it yet. But I was watching her testimony earlier. When the Wagners came back from Alaska, the BCI, the investigation, they found all they by now they had decided they were going to start digging and stuff out at the farm. They had permission to tap their phones. They had permission to tap their vehicles. So they put wiretaps on everything. They already had permission for the phones that they had previously. Now they had permission to do it all. They had all the phones, and they tapped the vehicles. Some of what was played in court in those, these are just not very nice people. And I'm not really sure, Alicia, why they left Alaska. I'm not clear as to why they left Alaska. I'm not sure. The ex-wife that testified today, she said that they told her they were going to move to Missouri and buy a farm, and they were all going to live again communally like they'd been living. That her and Jake would have their own place, but on the same property. But when they came back through the Border Patrol stopped them. They put all four of them in a different room. They interviewed them. Then they have played this in court. They interviewed them, and they did all of that. And while they were interviewing them, they wiretapped the vehicles. It's very cultish. It also came out a couple days ago that when they were looking out at a previous place that they had lived before the one at where they were at the time that this took place. There's a lot of locations in this. When they were looking there, they found a buried semi-trailer, and evidently they found a lot of stuff that was discarded. So they There's testimony that Billy Wagner was trying to get them all to stockpile food. Da 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 da. They all were all living together. They were all pooling their money. They were all paying the bills together. They would have family meetings about who was going to pay what, who was going to do what, who was going to buy what. George's name evidently was pretty good because he had a lot of credit, and they were able to do a lot on George. A lot. So that's what I got so far tonight. Who's still out there? Somebody put a one in the chat if you're still out there listening. They did not kill the kids. No, the kids are all okay. All of the children are still alive. Yay. There's a whole bunch of you guys still here. I'm so glad. Thank you so much. Is this not the craziest thing you've ever heard? I have been glued. Lorna, you and I were talking about the OJ thing the other day. I have been glued to this one. It's a lot like OJ for me. It's like, what? And you know, they ended up this week without having, I don't know when they're going to do it, but they're going to have to make all the arrangements so that there's enough room in the courtroom for the lawyers of Angela and Jake, because they're going to be testifying soon. According to what I'm hearing in the courtroom, they're going to be testifying soon. Hello, Colleen. Glad you're here. So, yeah. Now y'all know why I was so glued to this. I'm like, what are you kidding? It's absolutely horrible. It's horrible. It is hard to understand. But I don't know, Diana, if you've been watching for a while, I think. We try to go through and look at patterns here, because honestly, when you want to know what happened, a lot of times the patterns will tell you, okay? If you're looking at this area of Ohio, it is a economically depressed area. There's a lot of drugs. There's a lot of criminal activity. This area is very rural. I have to laugh anytime they say something like, there's only 14,000 in the whole county. I have to laugh because the county where I live only has 4,000 in the whole county. We may have 1,000 people in our little town. And you look at the mindset here, because that is part of this case, you guys, is the mindset. This, in Ohio, George can be convicted for these murders through conspiracy. So that is part of what the prosecution is trying to prove to everyone, is that it was a conspiracy. Now, just based on what I just read you, if that's truly what happened, because a lot of that I just read to you was based on what Jake told them. Yeah, more animals than humans. And they were professing to be Christian. They were cussing like crazy. They were screaming and hollering all the time. The kids were stressed to the max. Absolutely not the best living arrangements and not the best environment for children. And that was what they were the most worried about, was the children. Yeah, it is hard to understand if we are not okay. Ken Maines from Unsolved No More, if you don't know him, you should. He talks about this and he said, we all have the ability. We all have the ability to go out and hurt somebody. We all have the ability to kill somebody. It's in us. It's there. It's a matter of circumstances. It's a matter of whether we how tucked in we have our emotions, how we grew up, what we do with our life after we grow up. There's a lot of factors that come into play. So it's interesting when you look at the patterns here. So okay, you guys, tomorrow I'm having my podiversary. I will have been tomorrow, as of tomorrow, I will have been on YouTube for 4 years. So I hope you guys will come back tomorrow and join me for my podiversary. We're going to talk about all things the fiber floozie. And it's just going to be whatever happens. There's no agenda whatsoever. I just want to come on. I can't not come on my anniversary, my podiversary. So thank you guys so very much. Thank you. I know, 4 years. Can you believe it? So I hope you guys will come back. I am going to be giving some things away, and not just tomorrow, but yeah. So I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Have fun today and eat more plants. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. I'm trying not to put my finger up there, but I can't help it. Thank you to my moderators. Somebody tell me how to do that without getting my finger in the way. I can't do it. Thank you, all my subscribers. If you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. I really appreciate anyone who's watching. And y'all, I'll see you later. I'm going to be quiet now. Bye, y'all.